Well, another day and another 737 off the runway, this time off the side of the runway in Panama City, Panama. It's the 26th of September. My name is Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel. Let's check it out. Starting out once again with Simon Radecki at the Aviation Herald. By the way, you can donate to the Aviation Herald using the donate buttons here on the right side of your screen. I don't run an ad blocker because it blocks too much data for me. Besides, I enjoy these products. Copa Airlines Boeing 737-800 performing flight is CM-135 from Mexico City, Mexico to Panama City, Panama, landed on Panama City's runway 03 right at 21:12 local time. That's 2:12 Zulu time on September 26. In the flare, the aircraft drifted towards the right-hand edge of the runway, touched down inside the touchdown zone and runway, then veered to the left, and went past the left edge of the runway, crossing the runway edge at about 110 knots over the ground, or ground speed. The aircraft continued parallel to the runway, crossed a high-speed turnoff, beginning to correct towards the runway, but came to a stop about 2,200 meters or 7,200 feet down the runway and about 21 meters or 70 feet to the left edge of the runway. The aircraft was evacuated via slides. There were no injuries. So technically that means this is a runway excursion as opposed to the previous 737 we talked about in France, which was a runway overrun. In this accident, the weather is going to be the main factor. There was a major storm passing over the airport at the time of this accident. And again, the winds were shifting, not very strong, but at the time of the accident, we have winds out of the north, 010 at 3 knots, and then shifting to a right crosswind, 110 at 11 knots, recorded shortly after the accident, with thunder showers in the area and a lot of water, standing water, on the runway. Here's a good view of that track where the aircraft touched down in the touchdown zone, but drifted to the right and then drifted to the left, exiting the hard surface of the runway, pounding over this high-speed turnoff, and then coming to a rest 7,200 feet down the runway. Now in these pictures here, it looks like the nose wheel is collapsed. Did the nose wheel collapse somewhere on the landing, or did the nose wheel collapse after the aircraft departed the paved surface and went through the dirt, and or when it clipped that high-speed turnoff, did that fold up the nose gear? The runway 03 right at Panama City is 10,000 feet long, about 148 feet wide. And here's what it looks like on Google Maps. Runway 03 right. And this aircraft came to a stop right about in here. Here on FlightAware, pretty standard flight with a left base entry to runway 03 right. And looking at the data coming through here on the descent, looks very normal. It does not look like a slam dunk arrival. But what I'm really interested in is the last bit of the landing. So we'll pick it up here from, well, about 3,000 feet and play it forward. Pause it there. 204 knot ground speed, less than 1,000 feet per minute. And now they're placing a true airspeed and indicated airspeed here in the data as well. 1,200, 1,300 feet per minute coming through 2,000 feet. But once below about 1,500 feet, they maintain less than 1,000 feet per minute rate of descent, which indicates to me that this is, in fact, a stabilized approach. 170 knots on the ground speed, but given the winds, they're calling a indicated airspeed here on this preliminary ADS-B data of 154 knots. Now, the VREF, or the reference approach speed of a 737 at its maximum landing weight, a 737-800, mind you, is about 150 knots. And you typically add 5 knots to that, and that gives you a 155 knot reference speed or approach speed on a 737-800 at its maximum landing weight. You can also add up to a total of 20 knots in the event of wind shear or crosswinds or squirrely weather out there that you want to pick up the speed for. But bottom line is, this appears to be a stabilized approach coming in, and then if they touch down in the touchdown zone like the report says, right there, 110 knots. So they're decelerating slowly, and then there's a rapid deceleration here to 110 knots, and that's what the report says when they left the side of the runway. You start going plowing through the dirt, you're going to slow down pretty quick and then coming to a stop. Now, if we look at the winds just prior to the accident, 010 at 3 knots, pretty much a headwind, and then shifting to 110 at 11 knots. Runways are always labeled based on their compass heading. Runway 03 means you're heading 30 degrees, magnetic compass heading. So that way you can easily calculate your winds and your crosswinds. So a simple E6B crosswind calculator. By the way, the pilots always have a landing app with them, which will help you determine your exact landing distance given the conditions and your weight and the winds. And in that landing app is also a simple crosswind calculator like this. So you put in runway 03, you put the wind direction in 110 degrees and a wind speed of 11 knots, and you come up with a crosswind of, well, it's almost a direct crosswind, 90 degrees, 10.83 knots. Looking at the various pictures of the accident site and taking some stills from the video after the accident, you can see a lot of standing water on the runways and taxiways. So looking at this ground track coupled with the weather and the winds and the standing water on the runway, unless that nose gear collapsed when the nose gear touched down, if that had happened, then you lose your nose wheel steering, obviously, and that could easily drive you off the side of the runway. But otherwise, if the nose gear was working normally, this would appear to me to be a case of hydroplaning. With that amount of crosswind from right to left and that amount of standing water on the runway, it's very easy to get the aircraft hydroplaning, and in a hydroplaning situation, the aircraft is going to tend to drift or get pushed by the wind downwind, and it may very well also tend to weather vane into the wind. So seeing how the seasons are beginning to change here in the northern hemisphere, though in Panama you can get rain showers throughout much of the year, it's time to review the 3 different types of hydroplaning: dynamic hydroplaning, viscous hydroplaning, and reverted rubber hydroplaning. And that's another thing investigators will be looking at, was how long has it been since that runway has been cleaned of rubber deposits. As aircraft continue to land on the runway, each time they touch down, that big screeching of the tires leaves a fair chunk of rubber on the runway, and that rubber tends to build up. And if you lock up your wheels in that rubber deposit, you can cause steam underneath the tires, which will cause reverted rubber hydroplaning, which will look kind of like this. But more likely the case may be just a simply dynamic hydroplaning or viscous hydroplaning. Remember, 9 times the square root of the tire pressure is all it takes to produce a hydroplaning speed, where you are sliding on top of a layer of water, and it's very hard to maintain directional control of the aircraft when you're hydroplaning. And if you've got a crosswind, that's going to slide you potentially right off the side of the runway. Regarding the evacuation, there's really no other way to get the people off of the aircraft at this point. You can't run a truck or a set of stairs out there into the mud. You might as well evacuate them out the slides. Hopefully it was a commanded evacuation and everybody took their time getting off of here, if there's no fire or anything going on with the aircraft. But you can see where it's a little bit precarious over the over wing exits, stepping out onto a slippery wet wing and then stepping off of the aircraft from there. I mean, if you got the time, you might want to consider going back going back in and coming down one of these other slides instead. Especially the folks on the front slide where the nose gear collapsed, they basically were able to just walk down that slide. On larger aircraft, like the 777, there are slides that do deploy down the back side of the wing, but that's not the case for the 737. Regarding whether the thrust reversers should be out, well, remember, these guys have probably already ran their evacuation checklist, and so it's hard to tell the final configuration of the aircraft if that was their landing configuration, or if they went ahead and, out of habit, stowed the buckets and retracted the spoilers in preparation for the emergency evacuation checklist. The most important thing is that you shut down the engines before people start leaving the aircraft. And that's the problem between a commanded versus uncommanded evacuation. If people just panic and start evacuating the aircraft before they're told to, there's a good chance those engines may still be running and you might end up encountering one of them. But that does not appear to be the case in this case. So as pilots, what can we do to avoid these situations? We can take some time. We've always got plenty of reserve fuel on board the aircraft. And these rain showers tend to blow through here in these latitudes fairly quickly. And so conditions will change often within a matter of minutes. So a big heavy downpour can be over the airport. You can see it on your radar. The airport should be reporting it on the ATIS, and from the tower what the weather conditions are like on the runway there. And if you just wait, just hold for a little bit and let this cell pass by the airport, conditions will be a lot better potentially in just a few minutes, so you can avoid having to use your superior flying skills in dealing with the bad weather. So please pay attention to the flight attendants during the emergency evacuation briefing. Take a look at the card in the front of your seat. Take a look at your seat and figure out how many seats there are to the nearest exit. And remember, the nearest exit might be behind you, so count those number of seats in case it gets dark and you can't see. You can count the number of seats to get to your exit. Wear appropriate footgear and leave your stuff on the airplane. You'll get reunited with your gear as long as it doesn't get destroyed. Thanks so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.